Hello, my name is William Bond. Welcome to the Bond Report. Today's topic is When Is It a Science? 2. I've had slides on this. I will say in my own case, for quotation, as Dorothy L. Sayers there said in one of the Peter Wimsey things, a facility for quotation covers the absence of original thought, which I find to be a great help and comfort. Basically, in science, you are seeking the truth, and André Gide said it the best: believe those who are seeking the truth, doubt those who find it. They tend to be these other things. But I wanted to give a Thomas Jefferson quote here. The man who reads nothing at all is better educated than the man who reads nothing but newspapers. This has been a phenomenon all the time. It certainly was in his time. If one substitutes the word internet for newspapers, the sentiments is entirely modern. You have, that's just exactly, the man who reads nothing but the internet is better educated. Some things, in a science, how do you prove some things? Some things you know are going to happen, they're inevitable. Chicago gets a pope before they get a quarterback. If a guy is wearing a red shirt on as a member of the Starship Enterprise, he's doomed. He's lucky if he goes 5 minutes. Here's a whole crew of guys. They're all going to be gone. If a guy's got a red shirt on an episode of Star Trek, he's doomed, and it won't take long. There are certain more difficult is not more meritorious in science. There are obvious things you can pick up on stuff. You can observe a lot just by watching, as Yogi Berra said. But you have a certain amount of experience. Everyone does. You get it whether you want it or not. In fact, experience is what you get when you're trying to get something else a lot of the time. And experience does teach only the teachable. People say you're experienced. Well, yeah. Diabolical, one must say, people seek knowledge and they want to get it systematized and get it into a science. What the devil was selling is, in the garden, was knowledge. It's diabolical is all but synonymous with ingenious. And many people, even most people, confuse their opinions with knowledge, with the interesting corollary that the more strongly the opinion is held, the deeper the knowledge and the more profound the knowledge. You know, I have opinions of my own, said George H.W. Bush, but, I don't always agree with them. That's just an interesting example of George speak. Mitch Hedberg, and imagine if there were no hypothetical situations. You got to make assumptions in science. You assume no man really knows about other human beings, said John Steinbeck. But the best you can do is suppose they're much like you are. Well, that is an assumption. The Richard III Society, when they were doing this in England, thought they presumed that the more is known about Richard III, that's the better his reputation will be. Well, not the case. And sometimes the more knowledge, the more your initial assumptions prove to be wrong. You have to assume your data is true. George Burns said it. He's credited with this. Honesty is the most important thing there is. You learn to fake that, you got it made. This was a commercial for Mercedes a few years ago, science fiction without the fiction. How about science fiction without the science? At my age, one knows that the worst is generally true, and so you've got to assume that to a certain degree. Schopenhauer said it the best: a man past a certain age who's gone through 2 or 3 generations, as I have, is like someone who sits at a conjurer's booth at the fair, and he sees all the tricks 2 or 3 times from behind. They're meant to be seen once and from the front, and you sort of feel like you've been there before. And this is the same dog and pony show, and I think the analogy there is very apt. You can't tell all the time what your data means. You get raw data, it's hard to interpret. Delightful fellows, said Agatha Christie. Quiet, unassuming, delightful fellows, homicidal lunatics. There are certain rules. Clint Eastwood actually formulated that one. There are 3 rules for a happy marriage, but nobody knows what they are. Arthur C. Clarke wrote a lot of very early science fiction that's brilliant stuff. I don't believe in astrology. I'm a Sagittarius. We're skeptical. Some things are obvious on their face. Hunter Thompson said the first motorcycle race began when the second motorcycle was built. You know that's true. Al Bundy in the old show Married with Children, don't try to understand women. Women understand each other. Women understand women, they hate each other. Pepper Martin, Frankie Frisch had taken over the leadership of the Gas House Gang St. Louis Cardinals and was told they needed to work out twice a day. Pepper pointed out that the Yankees were across town. They were winning the World Series every year, and they did that by working one workout a day. And he said, well, we can profit from the Yankees' example, said Frankie Frisch, but we're going to work out twice a day. And do you have anything more to say? And he said, yeah. Pepper said, I got a mule back in Arkansas. I can run him 5 times a day if I want to. He's never going to win the Kentucky Derby. There are certain truisms that turn into science. And here's Nelson Algren. Never eat at a place called Mom's. Never play cards with a man named Doc. Never, ever lie down with a woman who's got a lot more trouble than you do. Now, it's phrased differently in the book, but we all know this. Some things are obvious. This was an actual Associated Press headline. Airline sources said a Pakistani jet that plowed into a hillside may have been flying too low. Okay. Why are there pyramids in Egypt? I got a couple of English friends because they were too heavy to move to England, where they could join the Rosetta Stone, some other things. Sometimes your data, you aren't asking the right question. If you don't know enough to ask the right question, we dealt with that in the other one. Some of the questions are answered 1,000 years ago. Long time ago. Clearly, also some questions are promulgated by people who benefit from having the answer they want put forward. An idea is so appealing to those who can afford to reward its promulgators is unlikely to be killed by mere evidence of its falsity. That's an interesting phrase. No one can stand in front of a classroom day after day and refrain from saying more than he knows. There's a lot of pseudo-knowledge out there. People don't want to be considered nerds. I'm not a nerd, Bart. Nerds are smart. But yeah, you have to look at the quality of your evidence. Gee, we haven't seen a lot of evidence that all parachutes aren't perfect. Who's going to give it to you? Well, gee, not all parachutes are perfect. We do this with intraocular implants. They just assume that they're all perfect in all the tens of millions, perhaps hundreds of millions that are out there on the earth. You just have as a given because no one's interested in finding out if there's a defective implant. Just because nobody complains as the parachute doesn't mean that they're all perfect. You have to look at the things the evidence has to go through. And then there's always the carpers. Well, you tried your methods. Did you try leeches? We have our medieval doctor, plague doctor here. You can consult other scientists about general scientific opinions of the time. We dealt with that, Dr. Semmelweis, Dr. Wegner, and Dr. Ridley. And basically, the Romans said this, Livy, if you have a crowd of scientists, whatever they're thinking at that time is the fashion, but it may or may not be correct. And he was applying this to something else. But in terms of a crowd of scientists, nothing is so uncertain or unpredictable as the feelings of a crowd. A lot of truth in that. When do you ask the right question is a very difficult thing. Some people have it, some people don't. Non Marquis said, he got rich through hard work, ask him whose. This is the guy that wrote Archie the Cockroach comics. And, you got rich through hard work, well, whose? The statement can be made, the higher the heels, the closer to God. I've heard this one from some people who were likely to think that. The beginning of genius is indeed, as Saline said, being scared shitless. This is how you know that a guy is starting to penetrate into the deeper realms of this. Hindsight, that most exact of the exact sciences. Basically, Anais Nin said this in her diary, you live out the confusions until they become clear. So, as we're going toward when is the science we need, as said before, quantitative knowledge. We don't wish, as Lord Kelvin said, to be meager and unsatisfactory. We want something that you can count. Some things you don't have to count. You already know them. He who resolves to deal with none but honest men must leave off dealing. 1732, Thomas Fuller in the Nomologica. And then you have certain other common sense things. Side effects may include tiny new friends. That's, let's check the ingredients of this bottle. Let's read what the thing says. They've got that in the small print. The Joker, some truism, some things you know to be true, without even knowing it. Give a man a plane ticket, he'll fly for a day. Push a man out of his plane, fly for the rest of his life. John Oliver there, this deathless line, I have exactly as much rhythm as you think I have. I mean, look at John. You can, if you ever watch John on television, that is a brilliant line. But some things are just true on the face of it. There is dispute that there's dark matter in the universe. One reads this as a scientific dispute. Plaintiffs' attorneys here chasing an ambulance, natural habitat, are irrefutable proof that dark matter does indeed exist in the universe. I mean, there it is. There are certain questions that can be answered as a truism, Dashiell Hammett and Red Harvest. You know, who shot him? Somebody with a gun. We want quantitative knowledge, rather, not qualitative. A lot of the time, this is deliberately done. As Nietzsche said, they muddy the water to make it seem deep. Billy Joel, talking about his research for Big Shot, he said, I did all my own research on that. You had to be a big shot, didn't you? You had to open up your mouth. That's kind of a funny line, but a lot of truth in that. Humphrey Bogart talking about they shot the African Queen on location. And he said, we lived on whiskey and baked beans. If a mosquito bit me or Houston, it dropped dead. You know, they're doing their own field work. There is more to life than being a passenger. You can do some of your own field work. Only Rod on the Twilight Zone knows for sure when you've got the right kind of field work. Education never ends, said Sherlock Holmes. It is a series of lessons, with the greatest for the last. We'll deal with some great unanswered questions as scientists. If a snake swallow his own tail, would he then entirely disappear and just be gone from the universe? The definitive field work for the study of this concept has been surprisingly difficult. The snakes are, as we see there, the snakes are skeptical, suspicious about what they're being asked to do, particularly with the next one, which is going to be if the snake got far enough along where he could get his head up his own ass, what happens then? Is that how black holes get started? Could he then double disappear, as it were, and enter another dimension? The great unanswered questions of science. The current general scientific consensus of our investigators is that it's hard to do the research in the field work with the snakes. They feel they've been unfairly slandered over the years by the entire concept of snake oil. They find that insulting, speciesist, and without foundation, and are insulted. Several excuses are always less convincing than one. No one believes you when you speak the truth. I wanted to give an anecdote about this. Freeman Dyson was born in 1923. In 1942, this is how difficult it is to collect true data that will reflect what is the reality. The Lancaster was the British bomber that they were using to bomb Germany in 1942. He called them magnificent flying machines. And what they did was they found that they could afford, the bombs were 1,000 to 2,000 pounds, and they found there was about 400 pounds of spare weight that they could put on that plane without changing the performance of the bomber. So therefore, we can get about another 400 pounds of armor on this and protect our crewmen from fighters, Messerschmitts, cannons, anti-aircraft. Let's get some armor on there. Well, where do we put the armor? Well, let's find out. So they go out and they did a survey like with layover transparencies and mapped gun damage, cannon damage, machine gun damage, and they mapped where this were on 400 planes, and clearly it was around certain areas of the plane. Well, this is the place that we should armor more because here's where the fire seems to be concentrated. Freeman Dyson is a little shy of 20 at that time. He's a real kid. And he's in there with a scientist listening to the RAF guys present that with their, as a kind of a committee meeting. And he said, this is the sample, and they had 400 planes there that they'd gone over. This is where we think the armor needs to be. And Freeman Dyson said to them, I don't think we should forget that your sample consists only of the planes that came back. And there's another science key. There's the young guy going to the heart of that question. where you think that's a good way to get data, but that's kind of the opposite. Well, let me close with that. Thank you. Watch for further bond reports. Thank you for watching.